You are listening to Kubernetes Bytes, a podcast bringing you the latest from the world of cloud-native data management. My name is Ryan Wallner, and I'm joined by Bhavin Shah, coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. We'll be sharing our thoughts on recent cloud-native news and talking to industry experts about their experiences and challenges managing the wealth of data in today's cloud-native ecosystem. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are. We're coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Today is November 19th, 2021. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. Let's dive into it, Bhavin. What is up? How have you been?
I'm doing great. Like I'm ready for the Thanksgiving week. I'm excited for it being like a slow week, and then week after that we have AWS reInvent, which is again a show that I'm traveling to. So I'm excited. Like this, I'm assuming this is a bigger show. I saw AWS already sold out all of its in-person tickets. So maybe we are expecting
Great.
15,000 plus people. So this should be fun. Yep. How about you?
Fun fact, I have never been to a reInvent.
Oh,
Yeah.
I.
This year didn't work out just because traveling 2 weeks in a row would be a little
Mhm.
tough, but I really do plan on getting out there to one. Maybe next year. Maybe next year.
Yeah, I did the one in 2018, I think, and it had like 42,000 people. It was just so crazy. Like there were queues for everything, like from the shuttles to like getting into sessions. People were like missing sessions to get in line for the next session. Yeah, if you didn't have sessions that you already reserved your spot, you couldn't get in. Like you just wasted the whole day.
Yeah, that doesn't sound enjoyable, honestly. But hey, I still want to experience it. Okay, moving on from that, what have I been up to? Let's see. I had a wild house this past weekend. We had a lot of family up, and it was so much fun. This week really been super busy trying to get ready and before I know a lot of people taking off for the holidays next week. Looking forward to that.
Hmm.
Going to travel down to see family to New York
Oh,
from
nice.
good old Boston. So
I hope you're not
that's the plan.
flying and driving.
No, we're just well, I should say we are driving,
Okay.
and it's not a very far drive, and we don't go through any major cities. So
Hmm.
while traffic still is always tough that Wednesday, it's usually not too bad.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Let's see. We have a guest on the show today.
Hmm.
Luay Alem, actually he works for Portworx. Disclaimer, and he's a solutions architect and Kubernetes enthusiast. He works with the cloud native and open source technologies, specifically helping customers in their transformation to start using these technologies. And he does a great job. I'm super excited to learn about what he does day to day, how he interacts with his customers, and really around this topic of, using storage and Kubernetes on Amazon Web Services.
And I agree. Like as you said, right? He works for Portworx, so some of these use cases and customer stories will be from Portworx customers. But I think we felt that it's important to also discuss how Kubernetes and Kubernetes storage is actually being used in the real world. So I'm excited for this one too.
Yeah, absolutely. That practitioner's approach is super key, especially because, we don't, personally, we don't interact with customers every day. So it's really cool to
Hmm.
see and hear. Um, Before we dive into that and get Louis on the show, let's talk about some cloud native news. How about, why don't you go first?
Yeah. So like the past couple of weeks have been kind of slow. No major conferences. I'm just catching up on some of the talks that were done at KubeCon. I'm catching up on like GitOps Con sessions. I saw a keynote from Alexis, their CEO, and that was really cool about creating an enterprise app store and using GitOps and Kubernetes for that. So he had a really cool comparison of how apps run on phones, and you can install them at any time, delete them at any time, and you can install it easily, switch between phones, and how you can use GitOps and Kubernetes for a similar workflow. Like, okay, you can install your containerized apps on Kubernetes running anywhere. You can start, stop, or delete them as needed. You can also use continuous delivery to auto update and install new patches, even have some drift detection in place. and then like just in the customized apps and certified section where like you can trust apps that are uploaded on the marketplace on your phone. Similarly, you can build an internal store where you can still have custom packaged apps, but then they are certified. You can have security checks to make sure whatever you're running is secure. So that was a really cool session. I recommend, like, we'll have a link for it in the show notes, but I recommend people watching it. It's just a quick 10-minute talk. What else? Again, along similar lines, I saw a new stack video uh, of how Pokemon Go or Niantic, the bigger company, uses Kubernetes internally, and how they have been using Kubernetes for the past 5 to 6 years. Pokemon Go was actually running on Kubernetes. So, like, when we all went
Mhm.
crazy and started using Pokemon Go, I was one of them. I played for 6 months and then got really bored. But all that scale was handled by Kubernetes under the covers. So that's also an interesting talk about how Kubernetes is used for these gaming apps and how you can build a platform on top of Kubernetes.
Yeah, I remember Pokemon Go on Kubernetes being one of the biggest sort of scale and production use cases for Kubernetes as people were starting to learn more about it. And I think seeing a use case like that was the first one that people were like, oh, you can do real stuff. And it was a really big deal. I remember that. I personally never played it, but I know that a lot of I think it was all built on Google Cloud, right? I believe.
hmm I think so.
Yeah. Okay. And uh let's see. What else? Did you have any other news
I just
topics?
have not news topics, like just some funding rounds and acquisitions. That's something that I like to keep an eye on. If you follow the Kubernetes storage space, Datacore picked up Maya data for an undisclosed
Yes.
amount. Looking at, like, so now they obviously Datacore was contributing to OpenEBS. Now with the acquisition of Maya data, they'll be obviously supporting that project. I was looking through blocks and files article, and I found there was a slight section at the bottom where Datacore actually had a minority stake in my data last year. Like, they bought some shares, and
Hmm.
now they basically went from minority stake to a full fledged acquisition. So things happening, and then like a crazy funding round. Like, Laceworks is another startup in the cloud native security space, and they just raised $1.3 billion of funding, valuing them at $8.3 billion. So, like, not valued at $1.3 billion, not being a unicorn. They raised that much money in a single round. It's just crazy. Like, I'm still not able to comprehend that. I'm not able to, like, keep my mind around it. But yeah, it's just crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot of dough. That's for sure.
hmm
Really good to see though that the investments are still coming in the space. I mean,
hmm
it being security focused, it doesn't surprise me. I don't think it surprises you either. But really cool stuff. Yeah, I like the whole data core story. Friends then now family.
hmm
And I wasn't familiar with data core to be honest, but it seems like a technology that sort of is an abstraction in itself, right? It can
hmm
aggregate other types of storage into, its own type of storage. If you have a bunch of sand, it can turn it into a NAS or whatever on top of it. I may be actually wrong about that, but it is an
Yeah.
abstraction from what I can tell. And just having, now, yeah, now the Maya data, which is
hmm
basically another abstraction, I think it fits right in their model. I think it makes sense. Excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, I worked with data core a bit at my previous job at Lenovo. They were like a software-defined storage solution running on our x86 boxes, where they can leverage, like, abstract, like, aggregate the physical drives and abstract a storage layer, block layer, for applications or virtual machines to
Mhm.
consume. So pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, in terms of articles I really liked this week, there was one from the CNCF community about edge mobility from the core and the edge. Actually, the talk was, I think, a member from Trilio, which talked about sort
hmm
of the mobility of applications and the need for security from the edge to the core, and it's really a migration use case and a backup and restore use case. But a really good talk. I definitely recommend it. if you're trying to understand sort of that mobility concept that we talk about probably a lot here on a lot of these episodes. And the last thing before we dive in and get Luay on the call, a little bit of a shameless plug. I'm hiring. So if you're interested in working for a really cool company in tech
A
marketing,
really cool manager, if I might add.
oh, brown nose there. The roles we have here, we both have some on our team as well in solutions. So please, if you're listening and you want to get in this space, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. So without further ado, let's get Luay on the call. All right, welcome to the show, Luay. It's great to have you here on Kubernetes Bytes. I want to learn so much from you today, but first, let's learn a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, why you're here, what you're doing.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. First of all, my name is Luay Alem. I'm part of the Portworx Solutions Architect team. I've been at Portworx for close to 3 years right now, about 2.5. So my background, my entire career been around the storage. I started about 25 years ago working at TMC. And then I moved along 5 years ago when I started working on Kubernetes. So some exciting stuff with Kubernetes. And thanks to Portworx, I had the opportunity to join the team about 2.5 years ago and became a member. So right now working with customers, pretty much helping them with their digital transformation journey, right? So that's my premier role.
Awesome. Lots of storage.
Yeah, OG EMC before Dell picked it up. I had a few years at EMC as well, not as many as yourself, but yeah, it's great to see the storage industry evolving.
Right.
It's good to see. So today's topic is really, we want to try to focus on AWS and what kind of storage options are there and which one of those play well with Kubernetes. I know you said you work with customers, and one of the things that we want to tell our listeners about is really what options are there for using storage in AWS, right? And there's obviously different ways to use Kubernetes. There's EKS. There's running Kubernetes sort of on your own, and then how you connect to storage obviously varies. So maybe tell us a little bit about your experience using Portworx or other options that you've seen in the field.
Yeah, definitely. So as you guys know, there's a fair amount of customers we have as well running on AWS. AWS does offer the tree driver for CSI that they use commonly. Some customers use also some EFS that we see some people were using as well, right? And we have all our customers basically use Portworx as their storage provider, right? And that actually due to the challenges that there is using the traditional CSI or storage on AWS, basically the high availability across AZs.
Okay.
So, and that's the challenge we have from some customers, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Like making sure that your EKS deployments are resilient to AZ failures. What are some of the other challenges that you see? How about backup or disaster recovery or any of those things?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll give you an example of the challenges that the customer, I actually work with one of our customers on. They do have a policies in place, right, due to compliance issues that it needs to be, the data has to be available across multiple AZs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when they deploy their application, they were using actually our sync to sync the data because they have their pods deployed. They're using 3 AZs. They're up in the US East. So they have one A, one B, and one C. They're EC2 instances, EKS instances across these three AZs. So for them, what they were doing, they were using rsync to sync the data between US 1A and 1B, and that does not scale. And that's not the way you want to do when at the enterprise level, when you have hundreds of pods, right?
Yeah.
It becomes a lot of work to do that, and it's not the way of doing things in a cloud native way. So we worked with them, and we actually used Portworx. And since Portworx is topology aware, so Portworx automatically knows that we have three availability zones that the cluster is deployed in. So when you create your volume, Portworx will automatically place your replicas across the availability zones. So when and synchronously replicate the data across all AZs. So in pod, let's say you're running, for example, Elastic, right? And this is what the customer's running. They're running Elastic on US 1E, 1A. That node terminates for whatever reason or fails for other reasons. The data is simultaneously available from the replicas running in the other AZs. So the pod actually gets served from these other nodes, right? That have the data. So that one customer, we worked with them, and we helped them actually migrate over from using EFS, actually they were using, to use Portworx, right? So they migrated. They have both EFS and EBS they were using. So we helped them migrate over. So that's one customer, use case. Also, some other challenges they have. They do have, for compliance, they need to have a region recovery. So they're in one, they're in the Ohio region. So they also needed to fail over to Virginia, right? And you cannot do that. You need you need a software that is DR capable, right? And we worked with them, and we introduced Portworx asynchronous DR, and which we implemented, and they were very happy with it. With the results, so basically automatically the cluster will fail over from Ohio to North Virginia. They do run that. They have a policy that they need to exercise that every 3 months. So every 3 months, this exact process exercised, and all applications are brought up, on North Virginia. They run them there for a short period of time, and then they fail them back to Ohio.
That's awesome. Like, testing DR plans is the best way to make sure they actually work. So this is good to know.
Yeah, and I imagine that's probably hard to do with rsync.
Definitely.
I've seen rsync used in certain situations. Even I think recently I was kind of investigating the OpenShift migration tool for containers, and even there's an option to try to do basically an rsync thing, which I think is only okay if you're gonna do like a one-time move of maybe a few things, right? But the moment you say, oh, I need to do this all the time, or I need to do this across 1,000 different applications, I imagine even with rsync, if you were successful at being able to script it and manage it yourself, that it's still sort of a very particular run book, that you have to keep in mind and maintain. So I think
it might take you 1 month to like test every 3 months.
I bet.
Yeah, they do actually. I felt, the guy was like a really super cool guy that was running this. So he was really relieved when we just, it's like, man, he was super happy. He was the first one. It was like in the meeting, we were meeting with them weekly. So we're doing work, and then they go test it, implement it on their own. And then he was like super excited. It's the first one to the meeting, and he's like, hey, let's get this going. I could feel his pain based on, as you said, rsync is not really the tool for enterprise scale.
Yeah, it sounds like, whatever storage you're running in AWS, it sounds like trying to manage the sort of efficiencies and reduce the complexities, whatever tools you use. In this case, it's Portworx, but is really going to help you scale as you grow your business and grow, the types of applications you're running on
Exactly.
AWS. I don't have much experience with EFS. I know it's sort of newer. It's interesting to see how, that you have already seen customers use it and even use it and try to move away from it. I'm curious, how often do you see the use of EFS? I know it's very different than EBS, it being sort of file
Right.
shares. One might think, hey, I can get around the AZ issue because I can connect this file shares
Right.
across multiple
Hmm.
AZs, but are there
Exactly.
challenges there?
Definitely there are challenges with it. Everything comes with a price, right? If you're running this highly performant application, this database that it's not going to perform well on, when you're using the EFS,
Gotcha.
for sure, So that's definitely the
Yeah, one
what
of the biggest
the
challenges, right?
effect.
Like if it's not performant enough, you might not get like the end user experience might suck for the application that you're running.
Right. Correct. And so basically, I had one customer that I work with. They basically used it, but they did not really care about
Got it.
performance at all. So the performance was not an issue for them when they used that. But that's one solution, right? So
Mhm.
so what they did, we end up when it migrated to Portworx, we do have similar, we offer to the AFS our shared V4 uh, volumes, right?
Hmm.
And that gives you similar, one-to-many access.
Yeah, I've always
So
used like I started using Portworx for shared volumes, and then for a demo that I was working on, I had to go back to EFS, and like it took me a while to actually make everything work. Like I started with an article that was I think older. It wasn't using dynamic provisioning, so I had to
right,
like manually create the file system. And for the node group that was part of the EKS cluster, create mount points for that file system, and then I also tried like manually provisioning a PV and then attaching it to a PVC. So that was not fun. Then Ryan pointed me to an article that, okay, this has been simplified a bit. So there is dynamic provisioning, but there are still steps involved in like, okay, you need to either have scripts using EKS CTL or AWS CLI to create those file system endpoints,
correct,
to get those identifiers, use it in your storage class definition, and then provision shared persistent volumes. But yeah, for port like migrating to Portworx, it's really easy.
right. And this is what we have, right? When you're talking about migrating to Portworx, so. Uh, we do have actually the tools in place as well. So that customer we worked with when we did who worked on the DR as well. We have the tools in place. You can migrate the workloads from any storage provider to
Hmm.
Portworx, so that we did not have to run his rsync neither to copy the data from the EBS volume to the Portworx volumes, right? So we have the tools in place with Portworx. So basically, we just converted these applications on the cluster, migrated them locally to use Portworx using our KDMP tool. Uh,
Nice.
so yeah, that was like really smooth transaction with that migration as well.
Nice.
And
What one thing I'm curious of, being in AWS, I know we're focusing on storage here, but do you find customers are choosing to use EKS more often than deploying their own Kubernetes infrastructure on
yeah,
AWS, or what breakdown do you see there?
I actually most of the customers that I have uh, been working with on AWS, they either running the EKS. Or they deploy with cops, right? So
Hmm.
basically, it's a majority is EKS for sure. The only other customers that I worked with that run on the AWS that they're running. They run different distro, for example, OpenShift, right? If they're
Got
not
it.
using EKS or something, they're running different distro. But pretty much EKS is now, and for all fairness, that when you go to the cloud, you look at managed services, right?
Hmm.
You don't want to end up managing the whole infrastructure on AWS yourself. You don't want, so you're not going to go just to spin up the some EC2 instances, manage them yourself, be worried about their upgrades and
Right.
just deploy after tree Kubernetes on them, manage it yourself. So the customers they do go with the EKS, for the ease of use, right? And that's the number one reason for going to the cloud because they don't
Gotcha.
want to manage anything.
So in like your experience with customers, have you come across customers who have migrated from on-prem to the cloud, or migrated from like virtual machines to using containers with EKS?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Actually, we do have customers who did migrate from on-prem to EKS, and I actually am working with one right now, just migrating, moving their workload from on-prem to the cloud.
Mhm.
Basically, it's going to be about like 70% of their workload is going to be on AWS. They've been running on EKS for a while, so they're going to increase with that, and run
Mhm.
more on EKS. And the beauty of it, basically, Portworx offers you the tool to migrate your workloads from one cluster to another, right? So basically, and they use that as a type of blue green deployment, right? So they
Okay.
spin up the EKS cluster and
Mhm.
they start moving the namespaces one at a time, verify with their end users that their application is running. Basically they migrate it to EKS. They spin it down on the prem for a week before they terminate everything for them.
Mhm.
They give the users the namespace on EKS, let them run for a week. They get the final okay from them. Everything is smooth. They terminate the namespace on the prem permanently, and they continue running on EKS. So yeah, so we do have customers migrating, and we also do have customers. They use the EKS clusters just for basically DR scenario, right? Um, so with the DR, so what they do in case of a DR on-prem, the cluster, the data center is down. They activate asynchronous, Portworx DR
Mhm.
um, on the AKS cluster, and that spins up their workload automatically. Um, and Portworx does have the API hooks in place. So basically, with the way they have it, they automated the whole process for them. So all what they do have a script that runs when they detect a failure for the on-prem site, and that will automatically scale up their deployments on EKS, and their application runs from there.
Nice. Those are like couple of interesting use cases. Like using blue green deployment. Again, it sounds obvious, but to actually implement it and have a process around it, actually working with customers to make sure
Mhm.
that they don't see any performance hit, or they don't see any downtime. That's actually a sound plan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That solution is definitely hard to come by. Probably easier these days. I just was flashing back to a previous employer I worked at where we had mesosphere clusters and on-prem and in the cloud, and we were doing similar migrations, and we had Ceph on-prem and AWS storage. There was no Portworx at the time, and we just basically said, "We'll migrate all your stuff, but then you got to load all your data back in."
Oh wow.
Like that was just the crux of it. We had Kafka streaming some stuff, but it was such a different world in terms of integration, even 4 or 5 years ago. To see customers and hear customers doing this sort of with ease. I'm sure there's some thought process, obviously, and design work that goes into making sure it works well, but it's really good stuff. Luay, what type of applications are you seeing being used most in these environments? So, is it mostly databases? Is it stateless as
yeah.
well?
It's mixed, to be honest with you. I have, basically because I work with with the storage, so all my customers that I work with, they do pretty much persistent
Sure.
data.
Hmm.
All right. So they do, I see a mix of really applications. I see a lot of Jenkins, for
Okay.
example. They have their pipelines. I see Elastic. They have customers running Elastic in there. We do have customers running databases, Mongo, Redis as well, Postgres. So it's really mixed. They're not really one more than the other. Yeah, so it is pretty much.
Got it.
It's a mix there. And again, each company, they do have different requirements, right? So like
Yep.
for example, one customers that I work with, they really, all what they're running there is Mongo, Redis, and some Postgres.
Makes
They
sense.
don't have others. I do have others. All what they're running there is like just basically Twistlock and some other tools, right? Or
Hmm.
Bitbucket, right?
Hmm.
I get
Yep.
some other, different customers. They're just running their Elk clusters there. So it's really mixed.
Now, are you finding these customers are going sort of all in once they start to run a database or something like that, and it goes fairly well, or are they still split across the chasm of like some of my stuff is still not in Kubernetes, but we're putting data in Kubernetes? Like, where on that journey do you
Yeah,
see most of them line?
actually, so they, yeah, that's really an interesting question because actually we have both right now. So we do have some customers that they still, half and a half, for example, right? And we have customers, they are already all the way in. And some customers, the one with the half and a half, they're basically moving, in that direction, right? Some, and you got to understand that digital transformation, there's some applications that you really, it's hard to break to chunks, right? So if you have that Oracle,
Yeah.
True.
uh,
It's
10
always going to be a mix,
terabytes.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you have, it's hard. Because I was actually talking with one customer out west. Uh, they have this Oracle, databases like you're
Hmm.
talking about. It was close to one. Really humongous, 1 petabyte. It's like really
Wow.
huge. It's how
Yep.
you got to break that. How you are going to break that,
Yeah.
and and so it's hard, right? You need to bring them, break that to chunks, and that's a lot of work. So,
Yeah, I
so
know.
you
I
still
know.
will end up with the mix.
I know in the past I've also seen, companies take the tact of, well, okay, we have this sort of on-prem stack, which is fine, but we want to modernize, but we're not just going to put Oracle in a container. I mean, you could. I've
Hmm.
seen it, but a lot of the times they want to break that data into silos, right? Or smaller
Right,
silos, and try to
right,
transform it. So I know like some of them stream it off to Kafka and transform it and load it into like Neo4j and Cassandra and all this stuff, and that's a huge undertaking, especially when you're talking about databases that size.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, and this is exactly like we talked with them is like about breaking these into silos, and just the idea of the guy with you should, the look on his face is like, I it's like we are not touching this.
So,
Yeah.
you said you would still work with storage guys inside organizations for this migration, right?
Right.
Once they modernize to containers and EKS, are they still responsible for managing storage, or it's like how does it handle? Like, do platform
Yeah.
operators come in?
Yeah, you see, that is a really good question because there's the mixture, right? There because when you go to the cloud, from on-prem, some of
Mhm.
them they still getting away from needing to deal with like the storage team, policing their storage usage is like you get this submit the request to get the disk added or stuff. So a lot of teams, what we see for the on-prem, they do like they're going the route of using local drives that they come with the servers, right? So this way they don't have the need to go to the storage teams like, hey, we need to carve us like 1 terabyte volume, attach it to this node. They
Yep.
don't need to do that, right?
Right.
But so with the cloud, it's actually a lot of these guys, like this specific team I'm working with, that they do. Uh, they are migrating to EKS. They currently they're on-prem. They're using their VMware, right? So every time they need a volume, they need to submit a ticket, and it goes through the whole process. They need to wait 24 hours to get a volume, attached. Policy, right? Companies politics. They got to go through. It's like different groups, totally different team, different managers, everything. When they go to EKS, they don't have to do that. It's like because they're the cloud up, they're the cloud operator team that owns this whole project themselves. So the volumes is there for them. It's just easy access. They provision it. So it's definitely there is a relief for these guys, not having to deal with the internal, politics, right?
Got it. Thank you. So, like for people who are getting started or like want to move to AWS or want to move to EKS, what are some of the tips and tricks that you can share? Some just 101 level things.
Yeah, but so be honest with you, a lot of customers we work with, it's like you really want to plan your capacity or your workload upfront and what you got to do.
Mm-hmm.
Understand what applications you're going to deploy and the need, what your end users require from you, what SLA you have, with them in place. You're doing backups, you're not doing backups, right? And
Mhm.
this side, so that these the really capacity planning is really important to understand. You don't want to under provision. But at the same time, you don't want to go crazy and over provision, for some crazy instances you're not going to use, right? So you do need to understand and plan, plan your upgrades, plan your node groups, right? Your AHG, how you're going to deploy it. You're going to go, you need to understand the architecture if you're going disaggregate versus doing, you're going aggregate setup. So you're going to use the auto scaling, or you're going to be static with the cluster. And beauty of running on EKS, it gives you all these flexibilities, right? So that's the beauty of it. So you can have believe it or not, there's a lot of a lot of restrictions from companies right now. Even when you run on AWS, they, like some companies, they do restrict them to only use like 2 AZs, for example.
Got it.
They gonna go use 3. So there are restrictions. Some place they don't give them all AZs accessibility. So it's not like for you and I, we log in, we can deploy anywhere, many AZs when we want to do, because it's our own accounts, right?
Sure.
For these
Mm-hmm.
companies, it's their policies, their security groups, their regulations that they have to bind to. So all that you got to understand. You got to understand the security policies from your company in place. Like a lot of companies, they have mandatory AMI refreshes every 90 days or every 60 days, right? So all this, you got to plan it up front before really, just go spinning up. It's really easy just to do, EKS, CDL and just create the cluster, right?
One simple command.
That exactly. But the fact is, like, you really need to understand all these regulations and plan on them. And and you bring a good point, Pawan, right? With Portworx, actually, when you do the EKS upgrade, it's really super cool about it. We do understand the volume placements with it. So when you do the upgrade, basically we use something called cloud drives that
Mm-hmm.
we attach to the nodes from when you create the cluster. So when you bring in the new cluster, Portworx will automatically, this terminated node that going away when you do the MI refreshes gets attached to the new node automatically, right? So it's everything, the entire AMI refresh when you're doing it, it's fully online. You don't
Oh
see
wow.
a node going, yeah, it's totally online operation
Like that's something
when that
new
is
that I learned
happening.
today. Like I haven't done the upgrade myself. So like okay, that's
Yeah,
good to
it's
know.
totally, yeah. So it's totally, online. There
Hmm.
is no downtime for it, and that's remember, this is something. Yeah, if you're using the AWS, CSI volumes, that node goes down, another node comes up. But so you would experience these restarts and pause, and that maintenance window you got to take. When using Portworx, these AMI refreshes we do with the customers, it's online operation. Their application continues running. Now, granted, all companies, when they do touch any cluster, they do have to submit uh, a management request, right, for maintenance,
Hmm.
but really just for procedure, more of than taking a maintenance window to do upgrades or maintenance on the cluster.
Right. It's just more like covering their tracks of like, hey, we're going to be doing
Exactly.
something in case things go
Exactly.
bad. We don't expect it to, but in case they do, don't blame us.
All right. Exactly. It's
uh,
it's formality. It's formality of the process, right?
Well,
Yeah.
Luay, I think this has been really insightful to get the practitioner's approach and sort of insight into how folks that you're working with are using storage in AWS. I know cloud can be complex. It can be super easy, like you said. Think beyond day one. It sounds like is a big part of this, and really think through your application needs and customer needs. I think there's a as we know on this podcast, there's a ton of storage options out there. Find the best fit, really kind of touch each one, whether you're using EFS or EBS or, a storage solution like Portworx or others in the industry. I think it's been really insightful. And I just want to thank you for being on the show, Luay, before we wrap it up here. And
And like
Bhavin,
you
you want to
have
say?
an open invitation, right? Like next 6 months, we'll get you back on and share some more customer
Thank
stories.
you again.
Stories. I really
Yeah,
like those.
definitely.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
the
definitely.
upgrades could be a whole podcast in itself. That I was refraining from asking so many questions there. I think it's a really cool topic. But Luay, we'll let you go. And again, thank you very much.
Thank thank you guys for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was really nice having Luay on. I know we work with him. Also, a East Coaster, Massachusetts person. I don't think we brought that up, but that's pretty rare here. It was really good to get his perspective from working with various customers, what he sees, how they're using Portworx and everything. I think
Hmm.
some of those takeaways we were just talking about are really important, especially the plan. I think that's what's sticking in my head through that whole conversation is
I know.
you really have to think through what happens after day one. I don't know about you, Bhavin.
Yeah,
What do you
like
think?
agreed. Like the blue green deployment that he said of how customers are migrating from on-prem to the public cloud using EKS one app at a time or one namespace at a time and making sure that there are no outages. That was really cool. Also, the fact that our customers are actually conducting DR tests for containerized applications running on EKS and like doing that every 3 months with automation. It's just like okay, it's good. All of this sounded like really good in theory, but actually having to talking to people who are working with customers and seeing that actually being a reality was really cool.
Yeah, I think getting that real world approach, just like you were talking about with Pokemon Go, seeing that happening in real life and
Mhm.
putting a real use case behind it, seeing it work at scale is always important. Um, AWS is obviously a huge place where people run cloud native applications, and
Mm-hmm.
we barely touch the surface. I think when it comes to some of the complexities and choices you have working with storage. I mean, we talked about EFS and EBS, but we didn't even go into other services like RDS or all those things that you can connect
Mm-hmm.
into your Kubernetes ecosystem of services in the platform. So we will have more episodes on AWS. If you have a specific topic, in mind, whether it's something to do with AWS or not, please let us know. We'd love to have some new ideas as we go through this. And we will be talking about what Kubernetes objects use storage next week. Or 2 weeks from now, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, we want to kind of break down what is a Kubernetes object and which one of those use storage and how they do. I think maybe this is not the most obvious to some, and I think it's going to be a really interesting topic. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm excited. Like we might have a surprise, right? We might be in the same room to record this, so should be fun.
The world is changing. We might be in the same room. It's so exciting. Anyway, until next time, everyone, please take care and stay safe. Thank you for listening to the Kubernetes Bytes podcast.